only four African-American authors had ever won Newbery in 100 years. Like even to this day, four had ever won. Kwame Alexander, Virginia Hamilton, Christopher Paul Curtis, and Mildred Taylor. So, that was a long shot from that perspective. And then no graphic novel had ever won. And, there are some great graphic novels. Hey Kiddo included. American Born Chinese by Jean Yang, which is very influential. Victoria Roller Girl, CC Bell's El Defo, David Small Stitches. Those are like some of my favorites. And of course, Raina, what is this, Raina? So it was nice to just be in the conversation.
I'm graphic novelist Jarrett J. Krzyzowska, and this is Origin Stories, a podcast where I go on a deep dive with some of my author-illustrator friends. In this episode, I'm revisiting a conversation I had with Newbery Medal-winning graphic novelist Jerry Craft. Jerry is resilience personified. Before we jump in, please take a moment to rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, now on to the new kid, Jerry Craft.
Origin Stories with JJK.
Jerry Craft. Hey, Jerry, how are you, man?
Jared, I can't imagine how thrilled you must be.
Dude, this is such an honor for me. We were talking before we went live about how awkward it is when you might be interviewed for something and, everybody's like, oh, it's an honor to be here. But how funny it would be if it's a really big deal for you that I am on your show, which, Jerry, and honestly, it really is a big deal that you're on this podcast because, granted, we go way back, but you're a Newbery Medal award-winning author, Coretta Scott King writer medal. You're appearing on so many different cable news programs lately, but you'll always be, to me, the Jerry Craft who had a table next to me. I want to say it was 2009. 2010 at a library conference. You know the story. It was either the Massachusetts Library Conference or the Connecticut Library Conference. And we had
ALA, something like
that. So I want to say it was MSLA, which was Massachusetts, which still is Massachusetts School Library Association. So you had a collection of your Mama's Boys, the strips, the treasuries. I had the First Lunch Lady book, few picture books, and we sat there and people came by our tables throughout the evening and they smiled politely and they picked up our books and then they awkwardly would put the books back at the table, kind of avoid eye contact, but then smile and then walk away. But through that, we got to be pals, and that's how we met. And I judge men based on the level of I base guys on whether or not they're a good dad. Okay. And we just talked about kids, and you immediately were talking about your boys and there they are. And there they are. They were probably around that age when we first met, but they're a lot older now, aren't they?
They are 24 and 22 now.
That's wild. And so, so we were, just a couple of scrappy kids with some comics that no one cared to really look at. And here we are now on a podcast together. All these years later.
What a nice hobby this must be for you guys. Like, no, we do this for a living.
And then too, I mean, I'm not sure how many, if you had a lot of these conversations with folks one-on-one, but even then in 2009, there were people, and believe it or not, librarians who would say, I just don't think graphic novels are right to have at school. Yeah. That's not a real book.
Right. If you ever read a real book, here's my card. Let me know. Yeah.
And so before we get into how you got into making comics professionally, I want to know a little bit about this kid on the far right. Tell us about young Jerry Craft, please, and tell us about your life. Tell us about what was your home like? Where did you live? What was your family setup? Did adults support you in your reading of comics? What was that like for you? What was it like for you as a kid?
So, a lot of it is Jordan Banks. For the most part, I was Jordan Banks, the protagonist from New Kid. The house where Jordan lives is the house where I grew up. So that photo that you saw, that you just showed, yep, that's it. So I'm sitting on the porch with my buddies, and we were kind of like the little rascals. And for the most part, wherever I was, I had straight hair and my skin was lighter. Uh, in school, I was a year younger, always, than everyone in my class. And, I was smaller. I didn't get my growth spurt until like 11th grade. So 11th grade through, I'd say about 21, I grew maybe 6 inches.
Mm.
But I was like 5'4" up until 11th grade. So really late bloomer. Always loved comic books and my Atari 2600. Always wanted to be an artist. My parents had only ever heard the term starving artist. So they were like, yeah, maybe not. No, so they wanted me to do it as a hobby, but not necessarily as a living, because they thought that the only living I would be doing as a professional artist is living in the basement of the brownstone until I was 50 years old. I think the only art or artist that you even knew of was Darren from Bewitch. I think he was an art director at an ad agency, but everyone else they thought was just selling paintings of bulldogs playing poker, in the other trunk of the car in the village. And that was not a life that they wanted for their son. So I had taken the test when I graduated from St. Matthew's Lutheran School in Inwood. I took the test for both music and art design. I passed them both. And my mom was like, yeah, there's a school in Riverdale called Fieldston where you can get a real education and get a real job. So you're going to go there. And that was the start of my life as Jordan Banks, the New Kid.
What did your parents do? Like, what was their vocation?
My dad worked for the post office for like 40 years. It was one of those where, he never missed a day. No, actually, there was like twice in my life, I remember him taking a sick day, and that just sent panic throughout the household. Like, oh my God, dad's going to die. Like he just never missed work. So when he retired, he had like 6 months accrued vacation days,
Wow.
so he retired like 6 months earlier than he could have, than he should have, but he had all this paid vacation. My mom always worked for the city. So she worked for like Mayor John Lindsay's office, and she knew Carl McCall, who eventually became governor, and like, or what yeah, I forgot exactly what he was. Um, so she always had these like jobs downtown in Canal Street and Chambers Street down there. But my dad's idea was basically, you get a job, you stay there for 30 years, you get a gold watch, and you retire. So there was no sense of, being an entrepreneur or upward mobility or, just finding your passion, whatever. It was like, do it, suck it up, and just, 30 years later, you retire. So that was kind of mindset that I had to break out of.
And it is a lot for a parent to wrap their brain around. If that's how your dad knew how to make a living and provide for everyone, and the way your mom was bringing income into the house as well, you may as well have said, I want to travel to outer space, because
Mhm.
like my grandfather had a very blue collar job, and he didn't get it, and he was afraid, right? He like your parents were afraid of, how is this kid possibly going to support himself? We need him to grow up in.
Uh, yeah, I'll get a little Dr. Phil on you. My dad, my dad told the story of being in the Merchant Marines in Port Arthur, Texas, and drank out of a white water fountain. accidentally and was like chased back to his ship and, like that kind of thing. So, that was a whole different era back then. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's that different now, but for a while, it seemed like it was very different. And to have that person that was, that lived that life and was, really never thought of to be equal or good enough. He had a lot of stuff like that. That was just like, you put your head down and you just go in and you do your job and you don't make waves, that kind of thing. My mom was a little bit better at that than he was, so I got kind of the work ethic, um, from him, but then the sense of belonging or, if you work harder, that you're just as good or you can be better or that kind of thing from mom. So it was a pretty good, double influence that I got that helped me to get to where I am.
Yeah, and I think that is the recipe for success and whatever you might want to do, but especially if you have to carve your own path, is one to feel like you're deserving of it, right? That you are just as able as anyone else to do this. But the work ethic, you have to pull some long hours and you have to hustle. I mean, you and I were both sitting at those tables chatting in between, but that was a part of our hustle, which was that you sometimes feel like a encyclopedia salesman where you're just going door to door with a suitcase full of books.
Yeah. I remember with my first Mama's Boys book, I self-published because I could not get traditionally published. And I gave up on being traditionally published in 1997. I started my own publishing company and I published my first book, Mama's Boys, as American the Sweet Potato Pie, 1997. I think I bought 2,500 copies. It cost maybe $5,000. And then I had 2,500 copies of a book that I had no idea how to sell.
Yeah.
So it was in the trunk of my car and, trying to go to book fairs. And then you go to book fair and, you come back with 2,499. We swapped with each other, and, so there was a lot. It was putting in your own money. It was driving up. It was being hopeful. It was coming back rejected. But how do you build up to be hopeful the next time? So, I mean, from 97, it wasn't until 2014 that I got offered to illustrate the Zero Degree Zombie Zone for Scholastic, that they had, quote unquote, a real publisher behind me. But it was a long, you talk about pushing a boulder uphill for, almost 20 years. There was a lot of that.
So what happened then? What happened in the time between, being a teenager, living with your parents, to then self-publishing Mama's Boys in 97? Like it's a big chunk of time there. Like what kind of stuff were you doing?
After I graduated from Fieldston, which is a school in Riverdale, which I changed to Riverdale Academy Day School in New Kid, I did get to go to the School of Visual Arts. So I did finally go to an art school. And, they had cartoonists such as Walt Eisner and Harvey Kurtzman and, some really legendary cartoonists, but I only really knew Marvel guys. Like if that had been Jack Kirby or John Buscema or Gene Colan, I'd be like, oh, great. But, these guys were doing indie stuff and graphic novels, and it wasn't superhero stuff. So I really didn't know who they were. So as a result, I did not think that the line would be, out the placement office and around the corner trying to get to their classes. So as a result, the whole 4 years where I was in School of Visual Arts, I couldn't get into any cartooning classes. So I never took any cartooning. I ended up majoring in advertising copywriters. So I did become like Darren from Bewitched.
Yeah.
And so I graduated and I was an ad copywriter. So I wrote radio commercials, a couple of TV spots, a lot of print ads. And I did that for 8 years at a place called Lewandowski Enterprises. It was a very small agency. And then I went to another one called McNamara Clapp and Klein, where I wrote a few things there. And then in the early This is Mad Men. This is me being Don Draper, that concept of Madison Avenue. And then in the early 90s, the ad business just disintegrated. And now I would go for a job and I'm like, is that my teacher also dropping off his portfolio? So that was kind of scary. And I remember going for an interview at Gray Advertising, and this woman says, "Oh my goodness, this is so great. I'm going to call a friend of mine." She calls up and I'm sitting right there. And she's like, "Hey, John, listen, I have this young copywriter here. It's one of the best I've seen. What advice can you give?" He says to get out of business now while you can. And it was like, wah, wah, wah. Like,
Oh, no.
I've been going to school for this and you're telling me to get out of business. So I went back to the placement office at School of Visual Arts, and they said that there was a woman who was looking for an art assistant, and she was doing comics for Marvel. And I was like, oh my goodness, I finally get to work on Spider-Man. And I get there, and it's a woman named Barbara Slate, and she tells me that she is doing kind of like Archie in ancient Rome. It was a series called Sweet 16. And she needed someone to help with the backgrounds and, things like that. And so I looked at my brother and sisters, all Archie comics, and I spent the weekend drawing Archie. And I went there Monday morning with a brand new portfolio, and I got the job. And then I worked with Barbara Slate for maybe 3 years, doing the backgrounds for Sweet 16, New Kids on the Block comics.
No. You worked on the New Kids on the Block comics.
All chilling.
Oh, well, you had the right stuff, Jerry. Yeah.
New Kid on the Block, the new kid, right?
That's an amazing detail about your trajectory. That was not in your Newbery Medal acceptance speech.
Yeah. So yeah, it was New Kids on the Block, and then she did Yuppies from Hell, which is a graphic novel. So that was one of the first graphic novels I had seen. I think one of the first ones I read was Why I Hate Saturn by Kyle Baker. And then it's one of the first non-superhero books I had ever read. And I was like, wow, I love this. This is cool. I hadn't read the Will Eisner stuff yet, And then Barbara did Yuppies from Hell, and then we did the sequel to that. And then after there, I had created a comic strip called Mama's Boys. And while I was working with Barbara, I sent it into King Features trying to get syndicated, because it was basically like 5 syndicates. It was like United, Universal, King Features, Tribune, and like LA Times. So those 4 controlled everything.
And people should know too that most of those are legacy strips. So being your Garfield, your Blondies, and in a lot of those situations, like even if the cartoonist has been doing this for so many decades and grows old and dies, then the children of that cartoonist keeps it going.
Yes.
So it's hard to break into that.
Right. So Blondie had been around since like the 1930s. Like Blondie was what they call like a flapper or something. She's like a showgirl.
Yeah,
that
sold cigarettes, like candy, cigarettes. Yeah.
Dagwood came from a wealthy family, and he falls in love with Blondie. And his parents are basically like, look, if you marry that flapper, we're cutting you off. And he marries her because she's beneath him, and they cut him off. And then, years later, it changed, and people forget about that. But that had been around, since the 30s. And, Henry and some of these strips, Flash Gordon, that my friend Jim Keefe ended up taking over. And you're right, when they die or whatever, they hire someone else to do Popeye. And so, each syndicate would maybe take on 4 or 5 new strips a year to see if any of them, could stick around. But for the most part, it was, Peanuts and, Lynn Johnston with For Better For Worse, and like Calvin and Hobbes would come, and that was like a big thing, and Far Side. And my job at so I ended up getting hired there as an intern 1 day a week. And I got to work on these comic strips. So like if there was a mistake made, like one panel, Dag would has on short sleeves, and next panel he has on long sleeves. I'd have to go in and fix the art, or if there were spelling errors, I'd, make a copy or photostat and put wax on it and cut it with my X-Acto blade and fix the lettering, or reformat the Prince Valiant strips, or Andy Cap. I'd have to reformat and make Sundays.
Jerry, why didn't you just use Photoshop? Wouldn't that have been easier?
Yeah. I remember when we first, I'd been there maybe 3 years before we got like one Mac Quadra. And like that was for the whole art department to share. We had to be, all right, I need it from 1 to 2 tomorrow. Okay, you can use yeah, it was so weird, and that was just kind of, and then I used my copywriting skills. So then when we uh, launched new comic strips, like we did one called Mallard Fillmore, about a mallard, a duck, like Howard the Duck. He was political, working in DC, and my headline was like, the most controversial bill ever to hit Washington. You know what I did there? And we launched Mutts and Zits. They're still around. A lot of strips only were like 4 months, and then would get canceled, and it was like literally back to the drawing board. But I got to meet, Mort Walker.
And Mort Walker did Beetle Bailey, right?
Bill Bailey. And then, the Brown family did Hagar the Horrible, and I think they did High and Lois together. So, and then Ray Billingsley did Curtis, who, just won the Reuben Award, which is a really big deal. Congratulations, Ray Billingsley. And so I stayed there for 8 years, worked in the comic art department and writing brochures and things like that. So it was cool. I got to meet a lot of artists there.
You really cut your teeth. That's your master's degree in comics right there.
Yeah, it really was. It really was, to go out to lunch with Fred Laswell, who did the Barney Google strip. And he's like, hey, come on, I'm taking that one to the Palm restaurant. I'm like, okay, that's the only way I'll ever get there.
I mean, I don't know this story, and so it's rattling around in my brain, and for me, it's really connecting the dots of that transition of, that the olden days of comic strips and what graphic novels are like now, because I think it's probably I know it's a foreign concept for young readers today to even grasp the thought that when you and I were young readers, when we were kids, and we wanted to pick up a comic, it was the comic strips in the newspaper or Marvel and DC comics, and that's all that we had access to. I mean, there were no graphic novels being published for kids, no original stories like we have now. And then at some point, like you got exposed to and I got exposed to at some point, that, whoa, comics can be something different than a superhero story or a 3-panel gag. And there is, of course, there is a place for those comics as well, but it's an art form that can be so much more. And I'm just, my brain is just racing now, thinking of the people you met and where you are now, and so this is all how you became an overnight success with New Kid.
Yeah, it was a piece of cake. So from King Features, I got my Mama's Boys comic strip syndicated weekly. So it was part of this thing called the weekly package that they had. That had original comic strips like mine. It had the classics like, Flash Gordon and Henry. And then they had like card columns and astrology columns. So if you owned a newspaper, you could subscribe to that, and you get a stack of stuff, and you take whatever you want and throw out the rest. So it went to 1,500 papers. I have no idea how many papers actually use Mama's Boys. So then I left there in 97, I think, and got a job at Sports Illustrated for Kids. I had taught myself website design, and I got hired as an online producer for the Sports Illustrated for Kids website.
That's very forward thinking in 1997. Very forward thinking to even the thought that, a legacy media company like Sports Illustrated might need that resource. So that goes to, that hard work and hustle that you were raised with, right? There's a
Yeah.
connection there.
And we used to get companies sending us toys and books and things like that. And I remember one day getting a advanced reader copy. It wasn't even stapled. It was just like a draft and said, "Hey, Monkey Boy."
Yeah, good night, Monkey Boy. Good night, Monkey Boy.
Boy.
Yes.
And I remember that from years ago. And it wasn't until maybe 6 months ago that somehow it came up. And I was like, wait a minute, Jared Kosheska? I had no idea that was yours.
Yeah. So think of the universe bringing us together where, my first published book made it to your desk at Sports Illustrated Kids. And so your guys,
Yeah.
they must have been real little then.
Yeah, they were. So 97, 98. I mean, Jay was born in 98. So he was smaller than little.
Yeah.
Aaron was born in 2000. So they were, by the time I saw that, when was that published? What would I have seen that?
2001.
Yeah. So, yeah, Jalen was like 3. And it was
Perfect
8.
age.
So I
Yeah.
brought it home and read it. We always did bedtime stories because the thing is, they hated to read. With the exception of Spider-Man and Silver Surfer, and even then I would kind of skip the part when he was Peter Parker talking to Aunt May and gets the fight scenes. You insolent adult, I will crush you. I get to that part where he's fighting Craven the Hunter, or Dr. Octopus. My teachers thought that reading comics would rot your brain, that they were just silly and worthless. So they would confiscate your comic books to keep you from reading it. And then, so I learned early on that reading was never for enjoyment, because the stuff that I enjoyed, my teachers didn't want me to do. And that's why I'm so concerned now with the whole book banning thing, is that there's so many people that are gravitating to New Kid and Hey Kiddo and so many other great books, Kelly Yang's books, and and it's like, wow, I love these. Yeah, yoink. We're gonna lock these up.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so what? It's not like they're going to then go and read. Oh, let me read Cats in the Rye again. They're gonna go on TikTok.
Right. Oh, that's so true. Yeah, they're not going to go like, well, I guess Dick and Jane is safe.
Right.
Some, you know, yeah.
Yeah.
It gets your dog heated. The beagle is heated.
Yeah, yeah. My beagles go up whenever they hear of book banning. I haven't trained for that.
That's good. That's good.
Dexter, it's okay. They reinstated my book. It's okay. It's reinstated. I know. I know. Yeah.
So
Yeah. He'll be okay.
That experience for you growing up must have informed the kind of dad you became to your boys then, right? About reading.
Yeah. I wanted them to have the love of books that I never had. And so I'll be like, I could read, but in my mind, reading was only for information. So I could read a 500-page book on how to use Adobe Photoshop or Flash, or, like some of these computer programs. And, so I could read that, or, finances or things like that. But the concept of sitting down with a book for enjoyment was not something that I did until I was literally a grown man with kids.
And what kind of books did your kids like? Like, what kind of books did you have to read over and over and over again that you'd be psyched about when they were reading? You were reading it over. They were like, what did they gravitate towards? Besides a Goodnight Monkey, that was a pillar in their education.
I am a master at reading Fox and Socks by Dr. Seuss.
Nice.
Even with the alliteration, I'm near professional at that. So that was one. The Horton Hears a Who. We were big Dr. Seuss guys, and then Captain Underpants came into the picture, and there was a Geronimo Stilton. And then Jalen, as he got a little older, Mouse Guard, he got into Bone on his own.
No offense to Jeff Smith. Bone. He thought you said the word bone. It's a good thing there's no graphic novel called Good Boy Gets a Treat.
Right, come here. No bones. Come here. Let me keep you up here. So, all right, calm down.
Bet he didn't do that. I bet your dog didn't do that to Don Lemon when you're on his show.
Right. There you go.
It's a beautiful dog.
Yeah,
Beautiful
so
dog.
then they discovered Wimpy Kid on their own, and that's when it went to a whole new level. Now, I had read things like The Wizard of Oz. Like, who knew that was a book? So I was like, wow, Wizard of Oz is a book. Huh?
Oh, I don't know that I knew that Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was a book until I got to high school.
Wizard of Oz is dark.
Yeah, it is.
It's some dark stuff. And then I remember Bud Not Budding by Christopher Paul Curtis. And that was a book that had these two little shiny stickers on it. And I was like, I have no idea what those are, but it must mean it's a good book. So then when I would go to the school library, I would look for those two little shiny stickers. And we got like holes and, I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that's a sign that, okay. So I would go and look for those stickers. And then, I know. And then after that, but Wimpy Kid was what did it for them. Because I had never seen, like, everyone in their class is walking around hugging a book. And my kids were like, Dad, we have to go to the store on August 11th. And I'm thinking they mean GameStop to pick up the new Sonic or something. And they're like, no, we got to go to the bookstore to get the new Wimpy Kid. I'm like, when a book is coming out? I had never heard of that. Like, the first book birthday I was aware of is when New Kid came out.
Yeah.
19. First time I knew when a book was coming out. And then they went to Percy Jackson, and they were the same with that. And so they're readers.
So there again, like that's like your second master's degree in literature. So you spent all of those years working at the Syndicate, and now you are getting on the floor with your kids and you're reading and you're supporting them and you're following their lead on their interests.
Yep.
And wow, that changed your life, didn't it?
It did. It really did. But it also showed me that, there weren't a lot of books with African-American protagonists that were on the level of Wimpy Kid, where it was just kind of mindless fun.
Yes.
Like a lot of the ones that I got, it was the big trifecta. It was slavery, civil rights, or police or gangs, And I'm like, where's just the fun book of, goofing around and eating pizza and playing video games and that kind of thing. And then, so out of the blue, so I was still self-publishing. And then one day I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore, because, I was always having to do a book for someone, right? I started my own publishing company, and then I worked with other authors to publish their books. So I would draw it, color it, do the layout, get the ISBN number, the barcode, upload it to a printer. So I was like full service.
Wow.
And did that for like 20 years and did 2 to 3 dozen books, that I worked on.
You're a one-man band. You were like the dude who's got like the guitar and the kazoo and the drums.
and the symbols and yep. And
Yeah.
I was doing it. It was a lot, and I was like, I always have to be doing something. And then I always had to be going to book fairs with like, now I would go at 15 different titles and, it was rough. So I reached out to someone that I knew in publishing. I said, I need to know some real people, like this self-publishing thing is a lot. It taught me a lot. And so she introduced me by email to 3 people and I sent out query letters and I got very polite rejections. And then about 3 months later, it was like March of like maybe 2012. I got an email. Hey, why don't you come in to meet with us? I'm like, oh, okay. And it was at Scholastic. And I went in and I had like every book I ever did. And I go in, I'm a one-man show and I'm juggling and singing and dancing and doing my whole spiel. And I do it. I'm like, ta-da! And they're like, so what else you got? Like, what do you mean what else?
That's the show.
Got the show, good night. I'll be here all week, trying to deal. And they were like, have you ever thought of doing a middle grade graphic novel? And I said, well, I have one loosely based on my life of being one of the few kids of color in a predominantly white private school.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And they all kind of sit up like, what? And so they were like, oh, now I had planned to self-publish it. But the only thing is, for me to self-publish a 200-page book in full color, I would have had to probably pay like $12 a unit. Yeah. I'd have to charge like $30 because it's very expensive, So it probably wasn't something that was going to happen. And then they were like, oh, why don't you do up some samples? So I did it up and they liked it. And I just did more and more. And then they said, have you ever read Smile by Raina Telgemeier? I said, no. And they go to the vault, and open up and the angels come out and the light shines down.
And all of the angels have braces.
Right, exactly. And they make me wash my hands and they hand it to me, open it up, and it was like, Smile by Raina Telgemeier. And I took it home and I read it and I went, oh, I know what I want to be when I grow up.
And how old were you? Because that's what I love like just cementing for listeners that, you don't have to know what you exactly want to be when you grow up until whatever. How old were you when you came to that epiphany?
I was like 40. Yeah. I was not a kid. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's an amazing story, an amazing trajectory, because you had 20 years behind you of all of these other life experiences that were building up to this moment to become an overnight success.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, I want to be Raina Telgemeier. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then a few months later, Andrea Davis Pinkney from Scholastic reached out and asked me if I wanted to illustrate the 0 Degree Zombie Zone, which I did. And then I got on my first press junket kind of thing, going with Patrick Henry Bass, who's the author. They sent me to BEA, Book Expo of America, which is in New York. And I had always gone there, but I had gone as the guy with his suitcase looking for free books, and wanted to be an author. So it was like mind-blowing to be on the other side of the table with a line of people. That was like, in a Scholastic booth, that was unreal. And then I illustrated that. And then they sent me to the National Book Festival. And then that was when I met Raina Telgemeier. I met Jean Yang. And so Patrick Henry Bass and I go on first, right? We're in this auditorium. And there's like 50 people. And then, our people leave. And I look up and now there's like 200 little girls hugging Raina Telgemeier's book. So she comes on next. It's like, wow, okay. And then she leaves and I'm staying there. And then there's like 340-year-old men with, man, what's the name of that book? They made a movie out of it where it's like the 7 ex-girlfriends.
Pilgrim, Scott Pilgrim.
Right. So now it's like,
Brian Lee O'Malley.
so now, right, it's him. And now it's like 340-year-old men hugging their books. And I'm like, this is weird. Like, who knew that people love books like this? You know, and it was every age group. And then after that, I think it was like Jeff Smith, and then there was like Jeff Kinney, and then they all signed together, and that the hallway was just mobbed with thousands of these book-loving people. And it was like, that was eye-opening. I was like, this is a real business. Like, who knew? You know? Yeah. And then we ended up, so I ended up getting an agent, you know, because Scholastic really liked the book. And I was able to get an agent. And then we ended up selling it to Andrews McMeel, which was one of the publishers that I had used, that I had tried to sell my Mama's Boys to, because Andrews McMeel specialized in those kind of treasury editions, those like anthologies of like Far Side and
Your Garfield.
Garfield and Ziggy. That was all Andrews McMeel. And they had an imprint that had like new stuff. So they signed me for their imprint that had like the new stuff. And now I'm like, I got my contract for New Kid. So I'm drawing. And I have until like April of 2016 to hand it in. And like March, like a month before I'm supposed to hand it in, they scrap the whole project. They get rid of the whole imprint. Like, well, what am I going to do now? You know? And so I had to start completely from scratch, you know? And then it was a matter of like finding a new suitor. And it wasn't until January 2017. And mind you, now it's rejected. And it was, I mean, it had been rejected like 5 times. And some people are like, oh, it's angry. You know, it's this, it's that. And it's, you know, and it wasn't until January 2017 that I met with Andrew Eliopoulos from HarperCollins. And he and Rosemary Brosnan absolutely loved it. They saw exactly what I was trying to do. So I signed a contract, and then it took me from January 2017 until February 2018, like starting drawing at 9 a.m., finished drawing at 3 a.m. Almost every day for 13 months. I handed it in February of 2019. And then the worst thing ever, it took a year for it to come out, you know, and I had so many things over the years come this close only to fall apart that I didn't even tell anyone. Like, I had a deal for like a 40-card Mama's Boys greeting cards from American Greetings. I thought I had that, and that fell apart. And then I was going to have this daily syndicated comic strip through King Features, and that fell apart. And I had this other thing, like, this looks good, and that fell apart. And then, like I said, Andrews McMeel didn't want it. So I didn't tell anybody, because I was like, I don't believe that this is actually going to happen. And it literally wasn't until somebody saw the Publishers Weekly release, and then they were, oh my God, Jerry Garth, congratulations. And they tagged me in it. And then I was like, okay, I think this might really happen. And then I retweeted it, but not tell anyone besides like immediate family and a few really close friends. And then it came out in February 5th, 2019. I had the cover blurb from Jeff Kinney, which is amazing. And then
Beautiful.
Yeah. And then when we reconnected because when they started sending me out in October of 2019, it was
or 2018, right? 2018. So I think, hey kiddo,
before it came out. Yes,
yeah,
2018. And that was NEBA and NABA, New England Independent Bookseller Association and North American Independent Bookseller Association.
A lot of acronyms in the world of children's publishing. And that's also something that not as many people know about. I mean, everyone sort of has a general idea of what a book tour might be, right? You tour around to bookstores and you sign books. But that pre-publication blitz is really important. And for about 2 or 3 months, you and I were at so many different events, eating rubber chicken, sort of greasing the wheels for these two books, which for you and I, our respective books were both sort of, I don't want to say a gamble, but we knew I knew I had a lot riding on Hey Kiddo because it was very different based on everything you've just told me. And man, you talk about emotional turmoil in those years, a decade plus leading up to New Kid publishing. So now that we know the full depth of what you had been through, how did you sleep the night before New Kid published?
Like, I just really didn't know what to expect, because again, like, I always just wanted to do Black kids as just regular kids, without the weight of the world on their shoulders. But I didn't see a lot of books like that. So was it like kids didn't read them, so they didn't make them, or they didn't make them because kids didn't read them? Like, I didn't know what, was it the chicken or the egg, which came first? And so I thought kids would like it. I didn't know if it would get critical acclaim. I just really didn't know. And then I remember this woman, now friend Tildy. I went on Instagram one day and I got tagged, and it was like, "Oh my goodness, I read the best book. I can't wait for it to come out." I'm like, "Well, why is she tagging me in this?" And I looked, and she had, like, literally, I think HarperCollins had like Xerox copies. This is before the advanced reader copy even came out. They made like Xerox copies and gave them out at some fair or book fair, weekend retreat. And she absolutely loved it. And that to me was like my first review. I was like, somebody read it and they liked it. And I was like, wow, okay. And then, like I said, I met you again. We reconnected at NEBA and NABA, and I had to sign like 130 copies of the advanced reader copy. And I had these like black Sharpies. I was like, "Hey, black Sharpies, that's cool." And then, I get the book and it's like all like black end papers.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the book has black end papers. So you invested in all of those black Sharpies only to then have to go into silver Sharpies.
And it was, and there was the advanced reader copy. So I literally had to sign in a pink marker on the very last page. That was like the only white in the whole book.
That is some exclusive. Look on eBay right now for those.
Exactly. Anika Denise was like, "You want to borrow one of my silver markers?" I was like, "Yes, please." And so then I could sign like the last 20 in silver. But up until then, everything was like the last page. And then I went to Winter Institute, which is in
which we should say is an event for booksellers.
That's like nationwide. That was in like New Mexico, Albuquerque, I think. And then I really started meeting like real authors. I took a selfie with Kobe Bryant holding the book. And so that was kind of cool. And then the book came out. I had a very small launch. There was like Porter Square Books in Boston. A couple other up in that area. I did like a Cambridge library. And then I went to like DC and Philadelphia, Brooklyn. And then, like, that was it. That was my launch. And then just slowly, but, steady. like the word started getting out and I got like 5-star reviews. And then it was just like, yeah. And it was just full steam ahead after that.
And you worked so hard on getting behind the book to promote it because in the before times especially you had to go to places, and I think that's still important and it will be the future of getting word out for your books. But I think there was a 2-month stretch where you and I were at a different event, book fair. Like I would see you every weekend for like 2 months. And then I had withdrawal because I was like, I haven't seen Jerry Craft in a while. And then the pandemic hit and everything shut down, of course. But, you broke down so many barriers on so many levels. The fact that you saw such a desperate need to have books with young Black protagonists that's about their joy, and that you wanted to make graphic novels and comics, and you combined every piece of your essence to give us New Kid. And then it won the Newbery Medal, the award for writing, and the Coretta Scott King Medal for writing. You must have been stunned. What was that like? What was it like getting that phone call to not only that you would get that prestigious award, but you would be the first to break that barrier to get a graphic novel into that stratosphere of prestige in children's literature? Oh, did you not hear me? Hold on. Sorry. Great. Hold on.
Yes.
Okay. I think I froze for a second. Hold on 1 second. Let me plug this back in. I'll ask my question again.
I didn't think you still got nervous after all these years. No, no, I think we're still frozen. I don't hear you at all now.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So you broke down so many barriers, sorry, now my son is jumping upstairs. You broke down so many barriers on so many levels. So one, you saw just that need, that desperate need to have young Black protagonists that were experiencing joy and their lives. And it's about their joy and not the pain of they're dealing with racism and what their ancestors endured. And then you broke another barrier of having a graphic novel win the prestigious Newbery Medal, an award for writing in the library community, where, librarians of yesteryear would not let a comic book into their space, as well as the Coretta Scott King Medal for writing. So your heart must have been racing when your phone started ringing and these award committees were calling you to say, guess what? You're changing history with this. That must have been such a head trip. What was that even like? You must still be processing it.
It does take a lot to process. Like first I gotta say, so it's Belmont and Porter Square Books. Those are where I launched. So I just want to thank them again. Yeah, like there were a lot of schools that were doing mock Newberries. And New Kid did pretty well in mock Newberries. But I knew that it would because there were kids voting, but I wasn't sure that adults would vote for it. One, it just was going against the grain of history. Only 4 African American authors had ever won Newbery in 100 years. Like even to this day, 4 had ever won: Kwame Alexander, Virginia Hamilton, Christopher Paul Curtis, and Mildred Taylor. So, that was a long shot from that perspective. And then no graphic novel had ever won. And, there are some great graphic novels. Hey Kiddo included, American Born Chinese by Jean Yang, which is very influential to show just how much I felt I could push it. Victoria Roller Girl, CC Bell's El Defo, David Small Stitches. Those are like some of my favorites. And of course, Raina, what is this, Raina? So like, it was nice to just be in the conversation. Like that would be one of my, like, as a grandfather, I did really well on that Monk Newberry's one year, and at times, and then more and more people started saying, and then I started like looking at the school library journals, the heavy metal countdown, and now I'm like watching like people on YouTube giving their Newberry predictions, and no one was predicted. And to this day, I call up and tease a few of them, but that's 6:42 a.m. The phone ring, and I normally turn off my phone because I work such late hours. But I had always heard that the phone rings at some ghastly hour of the morning, anywhere from like 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. And so at like 6:30, I was like, oh, well, it was a good run. So I went back to sleep. And then at 6:42, the phone rings. And all I could think of is, man, if this is a credit card offer, somebody is going to get hurt really bad.
And you're a gentle soul, so it's going to take a lot to
that would have been bad. And I was like, is Jerry Kraft? Like, yes. Oh my God, we want to let you know that you won the Newbery Battle. I did what? Like, what now? You won the Newbery Medal. Like, and so I wasn't screaming. Like, I was just like I'm doing now, like
stunned.
Oh. Wow. Okay. Wow. And then the hardest thing ever is like, okay, we're not going live until 9, so don't tell anyone. I'm like, I've got to sit on this secret for 3 hours. And then I just laid back down, my heart pumping. And then a half hour later, the phone rings again. And I'm thinking, hi, is this Jerry Kraft? Yeah. Oh, we're so sorry. We thought we were calling Jerry Pinkney. So we're going to eat it for you, And it was like, I had no idea what this next call was because there weren't any mock Coretta Scott King Awards. So I hadn't even equated the two. I didn't think I was even in that, in that realm. And so it's just Jerry Kraft, like, yeah. We want to let you know that you've won the Coretta Scott King Author Award. Wow. That kind of thing. It's like, wow. And then, a few months prior, I had won the Kirkus Award, and that was like weird because, Harper wasn't even going to send me to that. Like I heard I was nominated, and I talked to my editor, like, "Hey, Andrew, we going to that?" He's like, "Where?" Okay. So I booked all these school visits, and then he calls my boss, Rosemary says, we should definitely go. I'm like, okay. And I didn't prepare. And then I'm on the plane going there. I was like, what if I win? I said, let me jot down some notes just in case, And so winning that was the first thing that I was like, wow, this is legit, Yeah. And then winning those two and then, hearing, like not knowing that no graphic novel had won, not knowing only 4 African American authors had won, not knowing that no book had won those and the Kirkus. I'm like, are you kidding me? So the kid whose teachers told him that comic books were stupid and not real reading grows up to do the comic that legitimizes the format as real reading. It was like, Anakin bringing balance to the force, except without the violence. Then they're killing people and that whole thing. But, it was just really a lot. And because I wasn't a reader, I hadn't grown up with that Newbery. Like I know an Oscar and an Emmy. But I remember my friend Donna calling me in tears because she loved Newbery books. And so it got her. She's like, oh my God, you won. I'm like, oh, you know of this? She's like, of course I know of this. I'm like, oh, okay. So it took 6 months for everything to kind of sink in. And it still does every once in a while. Like now I meet adults who are like nervous around me, which, you know how you and I goof around. Like that's the last thing that I think that someone's going to be like nervous and, like shaking as they try to take a selfie. And I remember talking to a librarian. She said, you don't understand. Like you guys are our rock stars. I'm like, really? Okay. I'm like, if you knew me and Jared back in high school,
No, we were. And also,
that would be the last thing I'm sure either of us.
that's where you have to also, like, you
know.
don't understand. Like, I know so well what it's like to sit at a table with a pile of my books and have people pick it up, put it back down, smile politely, and walk on without it.
I remember going to NCTE, another acronym, National Council of Teachers of English. And, I had always gone to those things as a fan, and I would get like the program and I would go through it with a highlighter, like, okay, 12 to 1, Elizabeth Acevedo and Renee Watson. 1 to 2, Eric Velasquez and, Brian Collier. 3 to 4, Jason Reynolds, like that kind of. And so now for the first time I was going to these and I'm sitting in the audience and then the people next to me, I see them nudging each other and doing like we're sitting next to. And I was like, wow. And then the weirdest thing with NCTE, like I was supposed to sign copies of New Kid at say like 1 p.m. And I get there early and there is a line that's blocking my table. And I'm thinking, doggone it, if they book Jeff Kinney and my fans got to like jump through like a roller derby or Ring Olivia, a Red Rover, trying to get to me. I'm like, why would they do this? Why would they book someone with this long line that's going to block my table? And I'm kind of cranky now, because I was like all into it. And I go to the woman at the end of the line and I'm like, hi, excuse me, ma'am, who are you guys here to see? She goes, we're here to see you. I was like, this is my line? Yeah. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. And so, yeah, it just took a long time to, for all that stuff to sink in.
That's how you became an overnight success, right?
Right. I mean, it's still sinking in because, so I won the Newbery in January, and then the world shut down due to COVID in March. So, I didn't get to give my speeches in person.
Yeah.
And I had trips to China and Dubai and all these places, Hawaii, that I had to cancel. So I've still not really been in person,
You were robbed of the experience of having that immediate in-person celebration. I mark my word, you're still going to get it. If that's just
it's
weird,
weird.
Jeff Kinney throwing you a party, we will.
Well, they didn't even do the ALA Newbery poster the year I won. So they've got the one before me, and then they did the one after where I'm in second, but not the one that's like, hey, here's New Kid. I'm like, dude, you didn't do my poster? I got a spot on my wall next to my Read poster that I was saving. But yeah, it's just been surreal. Now, the good thing about the lockdown is I was able to finish the companion book Class Act in record time because I didn't leave the house. We would go out once a week to buy groceries and then come back and put plastic over the windows, you know, for like 8 months. So where it took maybe 2 years to do New Kid, I did Class Act in like 8 months.
And have you been spending more time making a third book in the series?
Yeah. So I'm about halfway through the third book.
Oh, that's
and I draw it all digitally, like right here. This is my Wacom Intuos Pro with the stylus, and that's how I've done all 3 books, drawing in Adobe Photoshop.
I would bet your third New Kid will probably come out around the time the companion book for Hey. So Sunshine was supposed to be out, but with everything happening, and I just didn't have the right headspace because graphic memoir is hard. So, if our books come out at the same time and the world's open, we should go together.
New Kiddo Part 2.
New Kiddo. Now that we know that you
right, there you go.
I'll work on the choreography.
Okay.
And
I'll do the lyrics.
Perfect. Look, we are all better off that Jerry Craft continued to work hard and work through that pain of rejection, work through that pain of having projects fall through. And you followed your passions. You wrote the book that you wish you had. You wrote the book you wish your kids had. And the world benefits from that. We all benefit from that. And thank you so much for everything you are, Jerry Craft. I appreciate you so much. I miss you. I'm glad that we get to text and jump on the phone sometimes to talk about this crazy, bizarro career we chose to jump into. But thank God we're here, and thank God we have, those librarians who are putting stickers on graphic novels, those librarians who are putting graphic novels on those shelves. And now more than ever, thank God for those librarians and classroom teachers who are standing up to the bullies, those short-sighted people who are saying, pull these books. And the librarians do that not because they think we're cool. They do it for the same reasons we do, and fight because we love the kids that we serve. And we fight for the kids that we serve. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time because you probably have to get back on that deadline.
I'm working till 3 a.m.
God bless you, man.
Thank you, sir.
All right, buddy. I miss you, man. See you soon.